Hi guys, here we are with chapter 3, talking about a very important topic, ethics in business. That's become increasingly more important. Um, in the past, say, 15, 20 years, ever since, there have been so many corporate scandals, and consumers have responded by demanding more transparency and good behavior on people's part, and the government has responded by increasing legislation. So we talk a lot in business. The whole point of business is to make a profit, right? But there are other things that are just as important. We refer to it as a triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit. It's this whole idea of sustainability, which we talked about previously. And so it's not just about measuring a company's success. It's not just about how much money they make, but also how responsible they are to their environment, and also society as a whole. So there's this whole idea of the social audit. Social audit looks at companies' performance in terms of instituting socially responsible programs, which include things like community work for the things for the community, and also being environmentally responsible and all that kind of thing. Okay, so let's look at stakeholders. We've talked about stakeholders before, and we're going to look at these individually, but a stakeholder is the people whose interests are affected by the organization's activities. So there's internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. And so there's the people, it's not just the people who work there or your customers or your vendors, but it's also the people in the community. So let's just take a look through. The internal stakeholders are employees, owners, board of directors. And then the owners are anyone who can claim the organization as a legal property. So for a private company, it's the owners. For a publicly traded company, it would be those who own stock in the company. And then the board of directors are the people who are elected by the stockholders to make sure that things are being run properly. And they are usually almost always also not only stakeholders but stockholders, so also owners. But they have a level of responsibility because they're the ones that are setting the policy and making procedure and hiring a CEO. Okay, external stakeholders are people who are in the groups of external environment that are affected by the outside, by activities of the organization. People in the community or, neighbors, businesses nearby. They might not necessarily do business with your business, but there's still businesses in the area, or people who live in your area, people who live in the neighborhood, that kind of thing. So the task environment includes, there's 11 different groups that present an organization that have daily tasks to handle. And they're include customers, competitors, suppliers, distributors, strategic allies, employee organizations, local communities, financial institutions such as banks, government regulators, special interest groups, and mass media. So then when we talk about the general environment, we refer to the macro environment, and we're going to talk about those later as well. It's economic, technological, sociocultural, demographic, political, legal, and international groups. Okay, so task environment, what's the customer? Those who pay to use an organization's goods or services. Competitors that compete for customers or for service. Suppliers are those that provide raw materials. And a distributor is someone, it's like one organization helps another help them sell their goods or services. So let's say you're a bakery, let's say you're a bakery and you're selling your brownies. That would be and you package your brownies, and who's going to distribute them to, say, Wegmans or Tops or 7-Eleven or whatever. And the supplier are also considered vendors. Okay, more about the task environment. Strategic allies are when you have two companies that work together to achieve goals. So, say a hotel and a spa, for example, might work together. They might not be owned separately, but they work together to provide services for their customers. Employee organizations like labor units and professional organizations, and then local communities. Um, uh, Local communities are people in the area that will have some sort of influence on what goes on, community groups, that kind of thing. A clawback is some sort of um, when a company promises to provide jobs and they don't. And then also on the flip side of it is crowdfunding, which has become more popular these days, and that's this idea that people help to um, fund an organization. Okay, so continuing with the task environment, there's financial institutions, the banks, savings and loans, credit unions, that kind of thing, government regulators, any kind of regulatory agency that an organization has to, whose rules they have to follow. Special interest groups, um, so environmental groups, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, those kinds of things. Child safety, auto safety, that kind of thing. And then mass media, TV, the internet, that kind of thing. They have great influence over what happens. We talk about that more when in the marketing class, when we talk about public relations. And every business has a public relations department, and tries to control what's in the media as best as they can. Okay, moving on. We'll talk about the general environment. Economic forces, so things that are going on, unemployment, inflation, interest rates, economic growth, things if you took intro to business that you talked about in there, so the things that are going on outside your environment, if there's high inflation rates or if there's low interest rates, whatever. Technological forces, any kind of new methodologies for transforming resources into goods or services, or also distribution, that kind of thing. And then social cultural forces are things that happen, trends that are going on in society, say, demographic changes, or, for instance, you see a change now in the way people eat. People want more organic and local food, that kind of thing. That would be a social cultural force. Or makeup of the workplace, women in the workplace, older people in the workplace, the way people dress, the way people eat, the way people live, the general environment where general ideas of what people are interested in. Okay, demographic forces, we talked a little bit about that. Changes in the population in terms of age, gender, ethnic origin, where people live, living in cities or living in rural areas or suburban areas. Political legal forces, change in political leadership. And then international forces in terms of what's going on in other countries and how that impacts us and how we're making decisions now. So these are all these different areas that the manager is trying to manage, trying to keep aware of, and he or she is trying to be responsible to all these different groups. And in there, we get into this issue of an ethical dilemma. So ethical dilemma is a situation in which you have to decide whether to pursue a course of action that may benefit you or your organization, but that's unethical or even illegal. So solving ethical dilemmas, it's really an important skill for managers. Some say that 62% believe that 62% of students believe that they're well prepared to deal well with ethical dilemmas, whereas only 30% of executives see students as prepared to deal with ethical dilemmas. So who knows? That could just be a perspective thing. It's from the book, but it's important that ethics is basically the study of right and wrong. There are ethics and there are morals. So ethics is standards of right and wrong that influence behavior, and they're going to vary among countries and cultures, and they might even vary among regions in our own country. Values, on the other hand, are relatively permanent and deeply held underlying beliefs and attitudes that help determine a person's behavior. So values, for example, valuing hard work, valuing honesty, valuing people's lives, valuing the sanctity of marriage, valuing education. These are things that valuing taking care of your neighbors, that kind of thing. Those are people have different values. Generally speaking, within countries, everyone has pretty much the same values, but as I said, they can change. Okay, so conflict we know is inevitable, and uh, excuse me, there's essentially two value systems that are conflicting in an organization. One is financial performance versus trying to maintain employee relationships, and then also trying to maintain um, relationships with the community at large, governmental agencies, and that kind of thing. Okay, so how do you decide? That's the question. So there's ethical dilemmas. Do people feel comfortable making these choices? So how do you decide how do you make a decision as to whether something is ethical or not? There are some that say, is it the first one? Is it legal? Is it right? Uh, would you want it in the newspaper? How would you feel if your mother, father, parent, guardian, someone, spouse, sibling, friend, boss knew about it? How would you feel about that? That's one, that's sort of like a simplistic way to look at it, but actually also a very appropriate way to look at it. But there are some different philosophical um, approaches to it. One is a utilitarian approach. It's the greatest good for the greatest number. Oftentimes you can write that off as as financial, saying, well, if we're going to make money, then we're helping our customers. We're helping our employees. And if we help our employees to make money, then they can go spend more money, and it helps the community and all that kind of thing. But anyway, it's greatest good, utilitarian. It's greatest good for the greatest number of people. Second one is the individual approach. Essentially, it's about what's best for the individual in the long term, and um, and this idea that if it's good for me, it's probably going to be good for everybody else. That may or may not be true. But it does assume that people will act ethically in the short run to avoid harm in the long run. So the thing is, though, that and out of we all have we're all living different lives, right? So we all have different interests, we all have different goals, we all have different situations. So what's good for one person in the short term might not be good for everybody in the long term, or even what might be good for people in the people in the short term might not be good for us in the long term. Okay, so moral rights approach essentially looks at the fundamental rights of human beings as we see them here in our country, as life, liberty, privacy, health, safety, and due process. Due process, of course, is um, uh, um, our legal system. So, for example, the Bill of Rights would be an example of the moral rights approach. And again, what the moral rights is, what's going to help us maintain our human rights. And again, that can change from country to country, but we are really focusing on the United States right now. Okay, so the justice approach, this idea that that we should try to be as objective and impartial as possible, and that people should be policy should be administered regardless of people's age, gender, sexual orientation, race, religion, that kind of thing. Okay, so those are the four methods of deciding an ethical dilemma. Okay, so what has the government? I mentioned earlier that the government has come in with a lot of different regulations, that kind of thing, to prevent white-collar crime, which is crimes that happen within businesses, and embezzlement, Ponzi schemes, embezzlement, violating privacy issues, that kind of thing. So Sarbanes-Oxley came in, and what it requires is the company's CEO and CFO to personally certify the organization's financial reports, and it prohibits them from taking personal loans and lines of credit, and also makes them reimburse the organization for bonuses and stock options when they're required by restatement of corporate profits. So if there's a problem, they have to give the money back. Also requires the community to have established procedures. The company to have established procedures and guidelines for audit committees. So now you'll often see. I'm sure that if any of you have work for any of the larger corporations, chances are, chances are you probably have an 800 number that you can call, confidential 800 number. if you see some sort of wrongdoing. That's part of Sarbanes-Oxley. Sarbanes-Oxley, that's really a very, very short interpretation of Sarbanes-Oxley, but it covers many things. Essentially, the biggest thing is that this responsibility of the CEO and CFO to sign the financial statements and certify the financial statements, because when this first happened, there were a lot of CEOs that were, they had the companies had taken money away from, because of their use of company funds, had destroyed people's pension funds and that kind of thing. And the response was, well, we didn't know what was going on. So now Sarbanes-Oxley says, nope, 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 nope. If you knew about it, if you're the CEO or the CFO, you had to have known about it, and so you have to be responsible for it. Okay. So how do people learn ethics? Essentially, there are, Kohlberg, we've talked about these different theories. Kohlberg says there are 3 levels of personal moral development. Level 1 is a pre-conventional, and that's when the person follows rules. People who achieve this level tend to follow rules and to obey authority to avoid unpleasant consequences. Managers of level 1, of the level 1 sort, tend to be autocratic or coercive, and they expect employees to be obedient for obedience sake. So, you could also say it's like a child, a young child, that they follow rules just to avoid, being grounded, or having their cell phone taken away, or their television taken away, whatever. Level 2 is conventional, and those are people who follow expectations of others. So people whose moral development has reached this level are conformists, but not slavish, and they generally adhere to the expectations of others in their lives. So it's sort of like almost a peer pressure thing. Level 2 managers lead by encouragement and cooperation and are more group and team oriented. Most managers are really at this level. It's this idea of trying to please the people you work with, trying to fit in, trying to keep harmony within the group. And then level 3 is this post-conventional, and it's essentially guided by internal values, and they lead by example. So these are the people who are farthest along in moral development. And level 3 managers tend to be independent, and they follow their own values and standards, and they focus on the needs of their employees, and they try to lead by empowering those working for them. They try to lead by example. And ideally, you have to make sure that if you do have a post-conventional person who is guided by internal values, that those internal values are aligned with your internal values or those of the company and the society. Okay, so how can organizations promote ethics? Create a strong ethical climate, and by making sure that they have good standards, and that they themselves participate in ethical behavior. Screen all prospective employees, have a code of ethics, and have training programs, and then protect whistleblowers who report organizational misconduct. I was talking a little earlier about that whole idea with the 800 number, the 1-800 number that companies often have, so you can anonymously call in, and that the whistleblower is protected. The whistleblower, of course, is someone who reports some sort of misconduct. Okay, so social responsibility is to make sure that is this idea that you take actions that will benefit the interest of society as well as the organization. And corporate social responsibility is that corporations are expected to go above and beyond following the law and making a profit. So making contributions, making sure they're not doing anything to harm the environment, when I say contributions, financial contributions, social philanthropy in terms of using their expertise to help the community at large. So there's social responsibility and then corporate social responsibility. It's helping others, not just yourself. So there's this whole idea of Carroll's global corporate social responsibility pyramid. So essentially, Archie Carroll, who developed this, says a corporate social responsibility rests at the top of the pyramid of a corporation's obligations, right up there with economic, legal, and ethical obligations. And some people might even say that the company's first and only duty is to make a profit. However, Carroll suggests the responsibilities of an organization in the global market should take the following priorities, with profit being the most fundamental, which is at the base of the pyramid, and corporate citizenship on the top. So you can go through, you can see economic responsibility, legal responsibility, ethical, and then philanthropic. Again, philanthropic is this idea that giving money away, it could be giving money away or also helping people using your skills to help others. So it's not just about profits, guys. It's also about helping those around us. Okay, so types of social responsibility. Sustainability is this idea of meeting the needs of this generation without compromising the needs of the next. And natural capital, it's the value of natural resources that a company has, like topsoil, air, water, and genetic diversity, which all humans depend on. And maintaining natural diversity is so important. Um, so it's in terms of sustainability and making sure our planet stays safe for many generations to come. Okay, philanthropy, making charitable contributions. Andrew Carnegie has that great line: "He who dies rich dies thus disgraced," meaning if you've got money and you've got talents, share them with people. And then, of course, there's the pledge that Bill and Melinda Gates have challenged so many billionaires to, that they should donate a majority of their wealth to philanthropy to help those who are less fortunate and not as well off as others. Okay, so how does being good pay off? Does it really pay off? Yeah, it really does. It has a positive effect on customers. People feel good about companies that are good to the community. It helps the employees have a good work attitude. And makes them feel proud of their company. It also helps them, increases their work employment, or the work performance. And then, it has this positive effect on sales growth, company efficiency, revenue, stock price, profits, that kind of thing. That if a company has a reputation of honesty and corporate citizenship, that profitability is enhanced. A lot of studies that will say that. Okay, so then finally, we're wrapping up here. There's this whole idea of corporate governance. So corporate governance is making sure that it goes back to the board of directors, making sure that the company is operating in the interests of owners and stakeholders. And there's been a lot of talk lately and attention being paid to strengthening corporate governance so that people the board of directors is separated from the CEO, so that they're not all like one big group together, that they're actually watching what the CEO does and making sure that he or she is behaving in an ethical manner. Okay, so that's it on corporate ethics. It's more ethics in general too. As I said, it's an important, very important topic, and one that has become increasingly important and for all of us in the past 20 years or so. Okay, so that's it on chapter 3, and we will see you back here for chapter 4.